Hey all, we're going to talk about HR today, which is chapter 11. And it is ironic that we're talking about this because of everything that is happening in our economy right now. People are working from home, businesses are having to shut down with the mandatory order that Governor Newsom has in place. But even before that, with social isolation, we were asked not to go out to businesses, um, especially restaurants and bars and salons and gyms, and I could go on and on. And when you think about all the people that have lost their employment or at least aren't getting paid right now, that number is quite large. And I think this is a real issue for people in the HR department, not only the people that are not going to work right now, but also the numbers that are working from home, and companies aren't equipped for that. Now, what does human resources do? It used to be called personnel or people development or talent acquisition. It's got lots of different names. Personnel and human resources, that shift is really important. It used to be some place where they basically pushed paper. They did the applications and they might do the initial interview, but it wasn't a integral part of the organization the way it is now strategically. HR has a seat at the big table because we've moved into an economy that is both service and information, meaning your biggest asset, your biggest quality as a company is your employees. And so human resources and getting the right employees and making sure that they've got the training and education is a big part of HR. So let's look at this wheel, because it really talks about what are the core responsibilities of human resources. Recruitment and selection, finding those employees and then figuring out how to hire them. Training, and then a performance evaluation. Who does that? How is it done? What's the process? And what's the purpose of it? Compensation, benefits. How much do you pay people? And how do you decide what to pay people? Employee separation. Either they leave voluntarily or involuntarily by being fired. Those are all part HR is responsible for. And then planning for staffing needs. That's probably the very first thing that HR needs to do, which is what do we need in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years, and looking to see, okay, where will we get those employees? If you're in a particular area, will we need to move areas? Do we need to work with colleges and universities to get them trained up so that when we need to hire them, we will have them? So let's go to the next slide. Selecting and hiring employees. This is a whole process. Where do we look for jobs? We talked about this a little bit in class. You might look on Monster or LinkedIn or Indeed or Lenza. There's lots of places online to look for jobs. And anymore, we aren't looking. Paper applications are really a thing of the past, as are in many cases paper resumes. And so when they get scanned in, they're looking for keywords. So always look in the job description for what the keywords are. Now, and by the way, we were supposed to have a career fair on campus. That's another place to look for employees. Employee referrals, promotion from within. Employee referrals are actually really positive and one of the best ways companies find employees. And a lot of companies have incentive programs for their existing employees, and they might pay them $50 or up to a few thousand, depending on how difficult it is to find an employee for that job. And the reason is that if you work somewhere and you have a friend who's a flake, you're not going to recommend them, right? You're not going to refer them. You're going to refer your friend that you think is going to be good at that company because you feel like it reflects on you as well. So that's where employee referrals can be, a huge time saver because and cost saver. So these are lots of different ways that they go out and recruit. And sometimes it's somebody's job in HR to do nothing but go out and go to job fairs and go to colleges and just recruit. That is the only thing they do. And there's some things that you cannot. There are laws in place, and the first one is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which seeks to protect women and minorities and all people really, to make sure that there's not discrimination. In other words, if you ask someone in an interview if they have children and what they're going to do in terms of daycare for their children, that really isn't an appropriate question, because if it's only asked of female candidates and not male candidates. So it's the kind of thing where there's a lot of questions you don't ask because they would be discriminatory. You can ask whether they have any issues that would cause them to not be able to come to work, whether that's transportation or something else, but you can't, and you have to ask the same questions to all candidates in those kinds of situations. The Civil Rights Act was really important. It was passed right after President Kennedy died, and it was that you cannot discriminate based on race, religion, ethnicity, national origin, and gender. And these things are really important because it said you cannot discriminate not just in terms of employment, but also in terms of housing and in terms of education. So admission into colleges and so forth. The Civil Rights Act also created the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and that is a federal agency whose job it is to oversee any discrimination complaints that come about, as well as sexual harassment complaints. Further laws, the Civil Rights Act of 1991 guaranteed, jury trials and some other things, but hiring and firing are both costly process for employers, and so they want to make sure they get it right. And in terms of, drug tests or any kind of physical test, the physical test, whatever test you have for your employees, it has to be equally applied, and it has to be something that's relevant to the job. So once you're hired, once you go through this gauntlet and get an employee, now you've got to complete an orientation program. And there's a lot of different thoughts on this. Some can be as short as 2 hours, some as long as 2 weeks. And so now there's a lot of thought about maybe having a 2 hour and then every month for the first few months, adding a few hours, because it's hard for everybody to take it all in at one time. But it really kind of goes over the company culture, benefits programs. There's a bathroom, here's your stapler at the most basic level. At the highest level, there's a lot of training. So that is the orientation process. And then there's all kinds of training programs. The most common, the cheapest is on-the-job training, and that's great because you're actually doing the job with someone. They're watching them do it. Sometimes the problem with that is that they are shorthanded quite often, and they let you loose before you're ready. And there'll be months later where you go, I was doing this all wrong because nobody actually ever taught me. And that has been a common theme that comes across in on-the-job training, but it is a very effective way to do it. Classroom, where you're like we were sitting in classroom, going through training process. And now computer-based training has really overtaken that because you can do it from home like we're doing now. And the management development is where you are developing someone to go into a management role, and they rotate through different departments. Let's talk about when someone is in the job, and then we need to do a performance appraisal. Typically, your manager does it. There are a variety of different kinds of evaluations. And the key is that you should know what you're being evaluated on. You shouldn't be scared or worried. They shouldn't throw something at you that was never ever discussed. And how often you're evaluated tells you how tough a company that is. In other words, if you're evaluated once a year, there's lots of time to make it happen the way you need to in terms of meeting your goals. If you're evaluated every month, they are on you, and it may be that they're a culture of churn, meaning they bring people in and the strongest survive and the rest fall by the wayside. Not a great place to work generally. A 360-degree review is a little bit different. And it is where everybody in the organization, let me rephrase that, people that you come into contact with, not just your manager, but your colleagues, your customers or clients, your suppliers, people you work with all get an opportunity to review you. So, and then your manager makes the final decision, but that this way they get feedback from everybody that you are regularly working with. How do you pay people? Well, the how do you can pay them hourly, you can pay them a salary, which is, if it's a 40-hour work week, that's the minimum expectation. Typically you're expected to work more if you're salaried. And how you decide how to pay someone really depends on what the going rate is. The only thing the government sets is a minimum, right? And then it's based on supply and demand. And if it right now, well, a month ago, okay, we had such low unemployment that it was really an employer, the employee had the upper hand in terms of getting a job. Today, with this whole coronavirus thing, I mean, we are in a completely different economy in just 3 weeks from where we were. So they look at a lot of different things, and you can have the same company. Let's say you work for Bank of America as a teller here in Sacramento, and somebody works in San Francisco. It is perfectly legal for them to pay the person in San Francisco more because their cost of living is higher. All right, so those are all the reasons. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide. Different kinds of incentive compensation. So you might have hourly, you might have salary, and on top of that, you might have this. So profit sharing. Company makes money, they kick back a little bit of it to you. In other words, the percentage. But let's say you did everything, all you guys, your department met all its goals, it far exceeded them, but some other division of the company lost money, and therefore the company as a whole lost money. And now you don't get any kind of bonus, any kind of profit sharing as a result. So one of the other things they've implemented is called gain sharing, which is if the company makes money and you've met all your goals, you get a bigger bonus. If the company doesn't make money, but you in your department have met all the things they were supposed to do in terms of productivity or cost savings or quality improvements, you still get some kind of compensation. Could be at the end of the year or a quarter. And so it keeps you motivated because you have control over that. You don't have control whether the company makes money as a whole. Lump sum bonus is a one-time cash payment to thank you for your time and effort. And when I was working for a company, we took over another company, and it was a mess. And it took a lot of extra time and effort and stress for the employees. And at the end of that year, I received a $1,500 check in my mailbox and an extra week of vacation. It was a one-time deal. It was their way of thanking employees for all of the work and effort and hassle that we had been through in the last year. So it can happen for a variety of reasons, but that's a one-time usually. And the last is pay for knowledge, which depending on your type of work, you get to move up to the next pay level as you get more education. I'm in the field, so certain kinds of education, I can make a little bit more money. All right, let's talk about benefits. Companies are not required to pay benefits. Sorry about that. Health insurance, vacation, tuition reimbursement, daycare reimbursement, having a daycare on site. These are all things that are nice, but they're not required. What is required is Social Security and Medicare contributions. So you see that money coming out of your paycheck that you're paying, your employer is paying the same amount, as well as unemployment and workman's comp. Again, the employer. So it's not just the $12 an hour they're paying you. It's more like $15 or $16 an hour. Employee benefits can add up to 30% on top of whatever an employee is being paid. So it is a big burden and amount of money for the employers. Now, they're talking about right now trying to help small businesses and who may not have sick leave policies to be able to pay their employees during this next few weeks as they're having to close. And I think that that's a very smart thing. And I saw a headline on Yahoo that said 48% of employees not covered by the administration's, sick leave package. Well, what they don't indicate quite, they say it, but they kind of hide it in the article, is that the companies with over 500 employees are not being covered because they typically have policies in place for their employees for sick leave, and they've put in extra policies with coronavirus to make sure that people are protected and have benefits and have paid time off. And that's why they're not covered by the government's bill, because the government is going to be paying for these employees' sick leave that work for small businesses. Okay. One of the nice things that's happened in recent years is the idea of flexible benefits, which is you can pick and choose what you want, especially if you're married and your spouse has benefits and you may not need them. Sometimes you can just get paid out for yours. For instance, for many years I didn't need vision, so I chose not to take advantage of that. I didn't pay for vision coverage, and so that is something that is really nice, where you have a cafeteria of benefits and you can pick and choose and pay for those. All right. Flexible work. Well, we're really seeing it right now, aren't we? The ability for employees to work from home. And if you look at the bottom of this, is 75% of the U.S. workforce will soon have the ability to telecommute from home or anywhere else. That's huge. And by the way, that number is going to grow as companies are going to figure out, well, if you can work from home, why do I want to pay for this building and electricity and all the things that come with this? Why don't you just work from home and we can still get the job done? We'll see how that works out, because for many years tech companies allowed working from home, and in recent years Yahoo, Hewlett Packard, just to name a couple, have instituted these. Now you got to come back to the office at least a few days a week. We want to see you here. There's something that happens, even though your team might be all over the world. So we are this huge crisis we're in. We'll see what that does to the whole work from home movement. I'm thinking it will probably grow it. All right. And these are some others. Job sharing. You have one job, two people working it. A compressed work week, you work 4 days and have 1 day off, and a lot of people do every other week. So you might work 9 days, and then this week, and then next week you work 4 days and have Friday off. There's lots of different ways to do it. And flex time is where there's core hours that everybody's got to be there, and then other than that, you can kind of pick and choose when you start or stop. When it's time to leave. Sometimes when you may leave your job for a variety of reasons. And they often do exit interviews to find out why companies left. Never burn a bridge during that time to find out why employees left, because they're trying to figure out if there's a pattern, if they need to make some changes. Successful companies want to hold on to their best workers, because it costs a lot of money to go out and find new people, then train them, and the training costs money, and then you've got time where new employees, it takes them a while to ramp up. If you've been doing your job for a while, you're much quicker, you have more knowledge, you're able to get things done than a brand new employee who's like deer in headlights. I don't know what to do here now. I don't know what to do there. So it is important. Involuntary turnover, you get fired for a variety of reasons. The company's slowing down. Look what's happening right now with so many small businesses suffering, that they're going to have to let some people go. I saw a business on the news in Kansas where they've had hardly any cases, but this small business owner had to shut down, and that 17 people he employed that are no longer have a job. So those people didn't want to lose their job. They were doing a good job. It wasn't that they weren't, it was through any fault of their own. So we'll see how quickly the economy comes back once we are through this mandatory, stay home all the time. Downsizing. Downsizing is when a company eliminates jobs or moves them overseas, and it happens often with mergers and acquisitions. And it often happens also with technology and outsourcing. We've talked about that before. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. Okay. Civil Rights Act, we talked about earlier. Here's all the things. And if you'll notice, um, sexual orientation is not part of this. It is, these are the things that are part of it and what's known as a protected class. Affirmative action is a policy designed to right past wrongs by having ways to both recruit people into positions they may not have held before, women in construction jobs, for instance. And it's also involved in contracting and so forth. The thing is, it was never intended to be quotas that you must have this many women or this many people of color. It is just meant to make it more open to those folks because they had been shut out in the past. It's led to some people saying, let's reverse discrimination, and do we really need it anymore? And probably the world has changed a lot from 50 years ago. We are not a segregated workplace, and we have people at all different levels, all different ethnicities, as well as gender. So we probably need different things, but still we need ways to make sure that everyone feels like they have a shot at promotions, at getting the job, and having equality. The way we do that has got to shift because we're not in the same place we were 50 years ago. We got to go with what we have now and how can we make that better. 88, law passed under the first George Bush, H.W. Bush, and it was designed to make sure people that had disabilities were not discriminated against and employers could make, quote, reasonable accommodations. It's been abused by some people, like a lawyer here in Sacramento who didn't even go to these businesses, didn't frequent them, but he would sue all these small, he'd go up to a strip mall and just sue everybody in the strip mall and say that they didn't have accommodations for him as a customer. And they would say, we can fix it. And he said, you got to fix it and you got to pay me off or I'm taking you to court. And most of these were little mom and pop immigrant businesses that really, were afraid and had to just basically pay him. And that was not the purpose of this law. The purpose of this law is to make sure that people who are blind or deaf or some other kind of disability are not discriminated against and can still be productive members of society with just a easy accommodation. It doesn't have, not going to put the employer out of business to accommodate them, but is it something they can do? For instance, if you could get a braille reader for someone who's blind, if they're in customer service and for their computer screen, things like that. And the Age Discrimination Employment Act passed in 1970, and what this does is it protects you if you're over 40. Now, if you're 25 and you don't get a promotion because they say you're too young, they don't think you can manage this group of people, that's not discrimination. That may be valid. You may be having a difficult time, may not have enough experience, etc. It's only over 40, and the reason for that is because that's where we see the discrimination. That is the end of our slideshow, and you'll notice that these are different than, hold on one second. You'll notice that these are different than the slides that you're going to have, and the reason for that is because the reason for that is that you are, I didn't want to use all those slides to do the lecture. You can look those over on your own. There's some of them that go more into depth, but I wanted to hit the highlights on this chapter.